There is an inflation machine running right now that is siphoning money from your bank account without leaving a trace. Between 2020 and 2025, it destroyed about 25 cents of every dollar in the average American savings account. And the strangest part, it got switched on in broad daylight. In early 2020, roughly 15.5 trillion US dollars existed. 2 years later, 21.7 trillion US dollars. The government printed 6.2 trillion US dollars through quantitative easing, more new money than the entire previous decade combined. If you were holding dollars, each one just got diluted. It is like pouring water into wine, the same bottle but a weaker drink. Today, I am taking this machine apart. I will explain how it works, how fast it eats your money, and 3 ways to fight back. Inflation stripped to the bone. 10 people, 10 slices of pizza, everyone gets 1. Now someone hands out extra cash, still 10 slices, but everyone is bidding higher. The price jumps because there is more money chasing the same stuff. That is inflation, when money grows faster than the things you can buy with it. That played out at national scale in March 2020. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell slashed interest rates to near zero. Congress passed the CARES Act at $2.2 trillion, then another $484 billion, then $900 billion, and then the American Rescue Plan at $1.9 trillion. Over $5 trillion were pumped into an economy where supply chains were broken and factories sat empty. It was like flooding an engine while the wheels are locked. By February 2021, the M2 money supply was expanding at 26.9% year over year, the fastest in 62 years of tracking. 16 months later, right on the textbook monetary lag, inflation peaked in June 2022 at 9.1%. Numbers Americans had not seen since Reagan's first term. Here's where it gets personal. The average savings account in 2022 paid 0.2% interest, while inflation ran at 8%. For every $10,000 you had saved, that is $780 in purchasing power gone in 12 months. While your balance looked unchanged, economists call it lost purchasing power. I call it a silent robbery. There is an old math shortcut that makes this painfully visible. It was published in 1494 by Italian mathematician Luca Pacioli before Columbus reached the mainland Americas. The rule of 72. Divide 72 by any rate and you get the halving time. At 3% inflation, your money's buying power is cut in half in 24 years. At 7%, which is what we experienced in 2022, that halving takes just over 10 years, 1 decade. But the rule of 72 cuts both ways. If 72 divided by inflation shows how fast you are losing, 72 divided by a growth rate shows how fast you are winning. The S&P 500 has averaged about 10% annually over 97 years. After inflation, that's roughly 7% real growth, meaning your actual purchasing power doubles every 10 years. 10,000 becomes 80,000 in 3 decades, without adding a single dollar. That sounds too clean, I know. But over any 20-year window since 1926, the S&P 500 has never delivered a negative real return with dividends reinvested. That includes the Great Depression, 2008, and the COVID crash. In 73% of all calendar years, stocks beat inflation outright. The catch is, you have to stay invested when it feels terrible. Markets dropped hard in 2020 and 2022. Every single time, given enough runway, they recovered. The rule of 72 rewards patience. It eats panic alive. The problem is access. Gallup's 2025 data shows 62% of Americans own stock in some form. That leaves 38% fully exposed. Among households earning under $50,000, only 28% hold investments at all. Those are the families where inflation hits hardest, and where the tools to fight it barely exist. If your money is not outpacing prices, the gap compounds against you every year. But watching a portfolio drop 20% in a rough year is not for everyone. That is where a specific government bond comes in, one most people have never heard of. Tips: Treasury Inflation-Protected Securities. Regular bonds pay a fixed rate, so when inflation spikes, your real return gets gutted. That happened in 2022, when the Bloomberg US Aggregate Bond Index lost 13%. That was the worst year in the index's history. The so-called safe asset lost more in 12 months than it typically earns in 24. Tips flip that. The Treasury adjusts your principal directly with the Consumer Price Index. If inflation rises 4%, your bond's face value rises 4%, and interest payments climb with it. Based on recent auctions, a 10-year TIPS bond yields about 2.2% above inflation. This is a guaranteed real return backed by the federal government. If deflation hits, there is a floor at your original investment. Their close cousin, Series 1 savings bonds, work similarly, but with different liquidity rules. The honest trade-off with TIPS is that they are a shield, not a sword. A 2.2% real yield protects purchasing power, but will not build large wealth quickly. There is also phantom income. The inflation adjustment gets taxed annually, even though you do not receive it until maturity. But as a defense approaching retirement, TIPS are wildly underused. The third weapon does not live on any brokerage platform, and it might outperform everything else. Your earning power, same math. If prices rise 3% and you negotiate a 10% raise, you have outpaced inflation by 7 percentage points with zero market risk. And here is what separates this from every other strategy. Nobody can crash the value of a skill you have built. No algorithm, no policy decision wipes it out overnight. Between April 2021 and April 2023, inflation outran wages for 25 straight months. At the widest point, prices had jumped 12.6% while wages trailed at 7.8%, a 4.8 percentage point gap that represents the real cost of standing still. But the people who used that window to land a certification or jump to a better role came out ahead of the curve. The return on investing in yourself often beats any asset class, and it is the one thing inflation genuinely cannot erode. The machine is still running. In January 2026, inflation came in at 2.4%, way down from the 9.1% peak. But the rule of 72 does not care about direction. At 2.4%, your money loses half its purchasing power in 30 years. The average savings account pays 0.39%. That gap is where wealth bleeds out. Stocks are the strongest engine. They have a 7% real return, doubling your money every decade, backed by a century of data. TIPS offer a guaranteed inflation shield with zero market risk, the right move when retirement is close. And your earning power is the one asset no crash can take from you. If I had to point you to one move this week, it is a broad stock index fund. Over every 20-year window in modern history, it has beaten inflation without a single exception. The machine does not stop, but you do not have to let it win.